What's going on, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another installment of the Detroit News Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Varsity Ford of Ann Arbor. And as always, I'm your host, Coty M. Davis, Pistons beat writer at the Detroit News. Please remember to follow me on all your social media platforms at Coty Davis _24. Once again, that's Coty COTY DAVIS _24. And of course, as always, for the fourth consecutive time, I'm here with my co-host.
Yeah, my name is Tarohn Finley. Make sure you guys follow me at Tarohn Finley, TAROHNFINLEY on all platforms. And yeah, Coty, it seems like, it's our third one now, but, we'll be talking right up to the season coming up soon.
Yes, sir. Tarohn, I would say, this podcast is like probably one of my favorite podcasts to do because it's always, put it like this, people always hold you accountable for everything that you say for the last podcast that you do right before the start of the season. That's basically what this is, because the next time you and I will come on this show, we will be doing a preview for the upcoming 2025-2026 campaign. My God, I can't believe we're already in the new season already. But on this latest installment of the Detroit News Basketball Podcast, we are actually going to talk about whether or not the Detroit Pistons have 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 players who can possibly be in the running for the season awards: MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, Sixth Man of the Year. We're going to get into all of that later on in the show. We're also going to talk about whether or not the Detroit Pistons took the correct approach by keeping their core group together and not going after a big name player. Tarohn, I believe you just wanted to just talk about whether or not the Pistons are going to get Giannis Antetokounmpo, because it seemed like he's the one that's on the market. And look, if he wants to come to Detroit, I'm fine with it, because one, he could still be close to his family, because a flight between Detroit and Milwaukee is only like an hour, if that. And two, and most importantly, I mean, at the end of the day, who doesn't want to cover Giannis? I mean, that's all I'm going to say about that. But on this latest installment of the Detroit News Basketball Podcast, we're going to get things started with just some quick takeaways about what we have seen through the first 2 preseason games. At the time of this recording, the Pistons are 1-1. Later on tonight, they're going to be playing against the Cleveland Cavaliers. And Tarohn, I want to start it off with you. What have been some of your biggest takeaway or your biggest takeaway so far through the first preseason game? Remember, they opened up their preseason schedule with a blowout win against the Memphis Grizzlies, and they also lost their second preseason game against the Milwaukee Bucks. However, when the main players are out there, when the starters are out there, majority of the starters, because as of right now, Jaden Ivey and I always get their names mixed up, but Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey, both of those guys are still sidelined due to their respective injuries. As of right now, with Jaden Ivey, you're still looking at him trying to work his way back from that broken leg injury. We had an opportunity to talk to Coach JB Bickerstaff on Monday, and he said, with Ivey, it's more so the confidence, going out there, trying to get back to the player that he once was. However, not trying to hinder or favor that leg too much, because in order for him to get back to the player that he once was before the injury, you're looking at a situation where it's not just him being 100% healthy physically, but it's also the mental aspect as well. So, that is the one aspect that Jaden Ivey is trying to deal with as well. Jalen Duren, he's being hampered right now with hamstring tightness. So we haven't seen him throughout the whole entire preseason. For Ivey, we only saw him for the preseason opener against against the Memphis Grizzlies. However, Tarohn, what have been some of your biggest takeaways from the first 2 preseason games so far?
Yeah, luckily for Ivy, when he does, come back and is fully healthy and confident, like you were talking about, he can play next to Cade Cunningham, who somehow had a more impressive game in the second preseason game than the first, putting up 26, 6, and 6, picking up where he left off in 18 minutes, which was one fewer than he played the first game. So the biggest thing for me is that it looks like that he can potentially take another leap. I know he had a 9-0 run by himself. So I think that's going to be the biggest thing, seeing what Cade looks like in the preseason. And, if they do decide to shut him down for the final few preseason games, he looks, like even better than he did going into previous years, just healthy, confidence, everything like that. So that's one of my biggest takeaways. I also like the improvement of Asar Thompson, just him, on the ball, playing more backup point guard and just trying to get conditioned to play defensively and have an increased on ball role. So that's something that I'm also have been really impressed with. I think he's still trying to figure out things like, how just his ball handling and just things like that, just the control of having the ball in his hand a lot more, because I think he can be sometimes a little loose with it, just his handle and passing. So that's something that I want to continue to watch. And I was also impressed with the last two games. I don't know if you've seen, but he had like a left-handed floater. So I think his touch
Mhm.
is improving. So I want to see if that, translates to better shots, coming in the corner or wherever that is, just from three. Even though he is kind of struggling from the free throw line, only 50%. So that's something I'm also watching. And then we also talked about last podcast, Marcus Sasser. He
Mm.
was scoreless in the last preseason game. So I want to see if that's just him missing shots or if it's a confidence issue, like similar to Ivy, what you were talking about. And I just want to see if that goes into the season, how long does he remain with this team? Just because he was part of the last regime, even though he was a first round pick. So I want to see if he remains on the team, or not saying that they will cut him or anything like that, if he's just someone that can be moved, or maybe Danish Jenkins, gets more of his minutes moving forward, something like that, even though he's on the two-way. So that's something that I'm also watching. And also shout out Bobby Klintman, and I'm going to let you
Mm.
take it from there, just because, quick shameless plug. I did check out the newest article on Bobby Klintman. So maybe you can start and talk about what you've seen from him and, some of your preseason takeaways.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought Bobby in, because that's actually one of my biggest takeaways from the preseason, and it's not just Bobby Clinton in general. It just shows like the depth of this team. You mentioned Dennis Jenkins, but it's not just Dennis Jenkins. You also have Tolu Smith. Both of those guys are two-way guys, and I had an opportunity to ask Coach JB Bickerstaff about the two-way players, and he said that the one thing that he loved about the two-way players that he have on this team with Tolu, who had a double double against the Memphis Grizzlies, and he also did his thing against the Milwaukee Bucks. Same thing with Dennis Jenkins. He didn't have a double double, but Dennis Jenkins, even though he's more so a scoring guard from what I've been able to see in the G League and throughout summer league, he's going out there as a point guard, facilitating the ball. I believe in the first game against the Memphis Grizzlies, he went out there and had like 6-7 assists and kept that offensive flow when Asar Thompson, when Cade Cunningham, when Jaden Ivey, all three of those guys were sitting down. That was someone that, kept this offense afloat and kept the ball moving and everything. And, in addition to those two guys, you also saw Bobby Klintman, and I really do think that Klintman is going to have an opportunity to carve out a small role from what we have seen through these first two preseason games, but more so the game against the Milwaukee Bucks. And I say that because, look, everyone knows going into this season, one of the concerns that we have about this team is whether or not who's going to be the backup behind Tobias Harris. And look, we look at the depth chart. I think we all can say that it's going to be Ron Holland. That is actually a position and a role that Holland is expected to have. That's part of the reason why he went into the offseason trying to bulk up a little bit. And we saw through the first two preseason games how, his improved strength, his improved conditioning has been a major positive for him through those first two preseason games. The way he's able to take bumps on both ends of the floor, not just on the offensive finish around the rim, but also on the defensive side of the ball, to make sure that he continues to be that defensive anchor, that defensive juggernaut that we love throughout his rookie season, but of course a little bit more smarter. So we know that Ron Holland is going to have that role. However, my biggest concern is, okay, what are you going to do outside of Ron Holland? Yes, you could make Isaiah Stewart a backup four, but if you take Stu and put him as a backup four, then whether that leaves you when you need to have an opportunity to let JD catch a breather, or if we in a situation like we are now where JD is not playing due to an injury or whatever the case might be, Stu is starting, what are you going to do with your depth? That's where I like and I've loved to see the potential and the growth from Bobby Klintman. And this is somebody who, look, I don't care if it's the summer league, I don't care if it's the G League. I don't care if it's the preseason game. Bobby Clinton has a lot of potential as a two-way guy to make sure that he can keep, the Pistons afloat on both ends of the court. We saw in that game against the Milwaukee Bucks how he was able to, score the basketball, whether inside, whether from, outside with his three-point shooting, whether he's facilitated. And I honestly think that's been the biggest, the most impressed I've been by Bobby Clinton is watching the way he's able to create plays for the for his teammates and stuff. And I say that because look, throughout this whole entire offseason, and since you and I have been doing this podcast, one of the biggest things that you and I have talked about is who's going to be the playmaker outside of Cade Cunningham. Yes, we can see now that Asar Thompson is going to fill in that role, but when you go back and you take a look at the success that this team had last year, especially during the second half of last season, when you had Dennis Schroeder out there, this team benefited from having multiple guys. Of course, Cade Cunningham is still going to be your primary number one, but this team benefited when you had multiple guys at multiple positions who are able to go out there and not only create plays for themselves, but create plays for their teammates as well. And that is something that I have loved from Bobby Clinton on all three levels that I have literally watched him play. G League, Summer League, preseason game, and even the season finale against the Milwaukee Bucks. Even though Giannis and everybody wasn't playing, he was still able to go out there and showcase that, look, one of the most underrated parts about my game is, and also the best part about my game is the fact that he can go out there and be a facilitator and be a playmaker. And I think that is where Bobby Clinton is going to have an opportunity to carve out a small role within Coach JB Bickerstaff rotation. Look, I'm not expecting him to play all 82 games. I'm not even expecting him to play 60 games or whatever the case might be. But I can see him having a role like a Paul Reed to where, look, we're not going to see him consistently. We're not going to see him every single game, playing somewhere in the ballpark to 15 or 20 to 22 minutes or whatever the case might be. But when you need someone to go out there and kind of like change the tempo, change the pace, if your starters are out there, and even your lead bench guys, if they're out there just lollygagging and the energy seem low, and or in a situation like what we saw against the Bucks, where you was out there playing without Tobias Harris, who was out due to rest. If you need someone who would come in and fill a vacancy and keep this team afloat on both ends of the court, that is where Bobby Clinton is going to have an opportunity to shine with this team. And I think that is part of the reason why I look at this and I say one of my biggest takeaways from the preseason has been the fact that this team has a lot of depth and a lot of talent. Now, we just hope that it translates to the regular season where they are playing against better competition. But once again, man, shout out to Bobby Clinton, Dennis Jenkins, Tolu Smith. All three of those guys have showcased that they deserve a roster spot. As for Jenkins and Smith, I'm not too sure if they're going to have an opportunity to carve out a role. They're probably going to continue to be on that two-way bouncing back and forth between the G League and the NBA. However, like Coach JB Bickerstaff said when I talked to him earlier last week, if an opportunity presents itself where you have to rely on either one of those players throughout the regular season, he has confidence in them, and I have confidence in him as well. So that's one of my takeaways. And my biggest takeaway throughout the first two preseason games, I don't know about you, but I think we could put a lot of stock into the second quarter explosions that we have seen
Right.
from this team. In the game against the Milwaukee Bucks, they scored 41 points in the second quarter. In the game against the Memphis Grizzlies, their preseason opener that they won, they scored 50 points in the second quarter. Once again, I understand it is preseason. You're looking at a situation where when you played against the Grizzlies, you didn't have Ja, you didn't have Jaren Jackson Jr. Against the Bucks, you didn't have Giannis. And we know Giannis is definitely going to make a big difference. However, you are still looking at a situation where it's an NBA game, it's an exhibition game, and this team was able to get out there and average 45 and a half points during the second quarter. And there are several reasons why I say we could put a lot of stock into that. And I think what we've seen in the second quarter is how this team wants to play for a full 48 minutes, because it's not just the starters, it's the guys that's coming off the bench doing what they have to do it. First and foremost, when you take a look at the fact that this team was able to average 16 and a half points in fast break points during that quarter says a lot, because this is a team who wants to get out there get out there with their defensive stops and run the floor. And it's not just that, it's the fact that you looking at a situation where it's not just Cade having the ball, orchestrating the offense rather on the fast break or in half court offense, but Asar Thompson as well. First, before moving on, let's take a listen to what Coach JB Bickerstaff had to say when I asked him about, what are some of the intangibles that he liked when the ball is in Asar Thompson's hands.
Well, that's something that we're going to do more of. The tempo that he plays at when he has the ball in his hands and the threat that he becomes when he has the ball in his hands, it changes the way that teams have to guard him. And he has the ability to make his teammates better. So he's playing at that tempo, pushing the ball. It forces everybody else to run, and we just become a faster basketball team. And we've got so many dynamic players on the wing and our bigs that it's going to be hard to guard us when we're pushing it and playing at that pace.
I like that because throughout this whole entire offseason, I believe this is something you and I talked about on the last podcast, is the fact that, this is a team that wants to play at a faster pace throughout the whole entire offseason. Regardless of who it was, we saw a lot of the players, a lot of the coaching staff, even Trajan Langdon himself, they put so much emphasis on the players improving their body, improving their conditioning, improving their strength throughout the offseason. And throughout these first two preseason games, that's exactly what we saw. And that's part of the reason why we seen them go on the second quarter explosions through these first two preseason games. And it's not just the fact that, the improved conditioning or the fact that you're putting the ball in Asar Thompson's hand. I also like the fact when they're getting defensive stops and they're going on these fast breaks, you have someone like Ron Holland filling the wing, but I also like seeing guys like Duncan Robinson and Chaz Lanier go out there and spot up behind the arc, and that's an easy open 3-point opportunity for them. And I also think that's going to be something that this team is going to be able to utilize, not just when they go on these explosive plays, but utilize to the point that's going to make sure that they kind of keep the 3-point shooting that they had last year, but they lost due to the departure of Tim Hardaway Jr. and Malik Beasley. And I think the best part I love about the fact that when they go on these second quarter explosions, they're doing this without Jalen Duren. And whether Jaden Duren is running the floor or if he's catching the rebound and pushing the ball up the court himself, and that's something that Coach JB Bickerstaff said that he wants to make sure that he continues to dive in more throughout this upcoming season, because I think the second half of last season, JD did a really good job showcasing his ability to be somewhat of a creation hub, someone that, if you put the ball in his hands, he can actually create plays for other people as well. And if they're doing this without JD, who's going to have a big role in this offense, I truly do believe that this second quarter explosion that we have seen is going to be how the Pistons are going to play throughout this whole coming season. Now, look, I would love it if they will go out and average 45 points every single quarter moving forward. I understand that's also unrealistic, but once again, the way how this team envisioned building off of last season's success, using the dynamic and the dynamic athleticism and versatility that they have, man, this second quarter just showcased that the Pistons offense could be dangerous, and majority of it starts on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. I think that it's just going to be fascinating to watch. Just, we're seeing what Asar is doing, like just, on the ball and things like that. I'm interested to see if we also start to see more, on the ball stuff from Brian Holland. I know he's given the team different type of energy and, just being on that second unit, just his athleticism and just his defense. But I'm going to be interested to see what does he look like, more as an on-the-ball creator, like I was saying, and also as a shooter. I know that he, scored a three-pointer earlier in the game, and his shot just looked a lot better than it did last year, just from a pure, form perspective. So I'm just really interested in his development. And another thing that I really like about the Pistons that they've been doing is just really experimenting with these lineups. So while Ivy hasn't played, in the second game, and while Duren hasn't played in the preseason at all, I think it's given JB Bickerstaff the, opportunity to experiment with a lot of these wing combinations, who plays next to Cade. And this is just going to be really important because while he probably, well, we know he has his starting lineup going into the season. It's going to be interesting to see who he closes with as well. So those are just some things that I'm going to look for in the next 2 preseason games, just to see how the rotation just changes, not only in that second quarter, like, if they have something working the last 2 second quarters, maybe that's something that they can close games within the regular season as well.
The Detroit Pistons. The one thing I love about this podcast, the next time we get together, is going to be a day, maybe 2 days before the start of the 2025-2026 campaign. And there's a lot at stake for the Pistons for this upcoming season. You're looking at a situation for the first time in probably a decade, probably a little bit more than a decade. This is a team that's expected to be towards the top of the Eastern Conference. You got a guy like Cade Cunningham, who is expected to become an MVP candidate, a true legit MVP candidate for this upcoming season. You have several young guys like Asar, JD, J.I., Ron Holland. All of these guys are expected to take another leap for this upcoming season. And we saw how important veterans were for this organization last year. You had guys like Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr. Later on throughout the season, at the trade deadline, you got an opportunity to land Dennis Schroeder. And we saw all 3 of those guys have big roles for this organization. And unfortunately, throughout the offseason, every single one of those guys had a situation where they had to depart from this organization. The one guy that played a big role in the success of turning this franchise around is Tobias Harris. And Tobias Harris is expected to make sure he has that same role as last year. I say all that just to say there were some people expecting the Pistons to go after a quote-unquote big name player. Throughout the offseason, if we keep it in the book, there was only like 2, I guess, big name franchise cornerstone players that, was out there on the market in a sense. At the start of the offseason, it was Zion Williamson. And then later on throughout the offseason, and even so now going into the season, there's Giannis Antetokounmpo. Trade rumors are really heating up about him. I know there's rumors about, him only wanting to go to New York, which means 9 times out of 10, if he gets traded, it's not going to be to New York. It's going to be somewhere else where people say, wow, I didn't know that it was on the radar to get Giannis. We've seen this movie before. We know how this is going to turn out. And every time we talk about a trade, every time we talk about the Bucks, every time we talk about Giannis, is going to be where is he going to play next. Unfortunately, I'm glad I don't have to cover that. And hopefully Cade don't make me go through it in the next couple of years where I have to talk about that foolishness. But that's neither here or there. But Tarohn, what are your thoughts about the Pistons using their approach to keep their core group together in hopes of building on last season's success, other than trying to trade majority of those young guys, those promising guys, and go after, someone that's a big name player or a franchise cornerstone changer?
So for a while, I agree with Trajan Langdon's approach, but I think just watching, Detroit sports this past year, I think my thoughts are changing just a little bit on it, just because we seen what the Tigers, did last week. And, that was that they didn't make a move, at the deadline. Well, they made a few moves, but they were like really marginal moves that didn't really get them over the hump. And now they're at home, watching the Mariners in the playoffs, where they could have been that team in their place if they made a few moves. And also the Lions, the same thing, just sticking with that young core and, deciding not to go out there and trade young players and picks. And I know both sports are different, but the Pistons window is now. The East, as we talked about, is a little watered down. Tatum, I know he looks a lot better than I thought he would look going into the season, but he's still not expected to play a majority of the season. Tyrese Halliburton is not expected to play the season as far as I know. So I think that the Pistons, while I'm not saying that they should give away their young core or give away these picks, I think that if there is the potential to get a Giannis, someone like that, a cornerstone, and not saying that they can get him or that he's even on the trade block, even though he's doing everything to signal that he could potentially be interested in something if, the Bucks don't get over the hump. And like you said earlier, we're not too far from Milwaukee, things like that. If someone like Giannis is on the table, do everything you can to get him, even if that means, trading some of our young players or some of the Pistons young players, trading some of those picks, even signing a couple of his brothers, as the Bucks have done, just to keep Giannis happy. But if you can get someone like that next to Cade, I feel like that will put you on the top of the East. So those are some things that I'm considering. Even someone like a Zion Williamson, like you said, would be a great asset as long as he's healthy. And I know that Trajan, has some ties with him, just with him being part of the last front office, that Zion's team is, or the Pelicans basically. So I think that if you can go out and get someone like that, I think that it at least has to be considered.
Maybe, just maybe. And I'm not saying that this could be their ceiling. And if it works out this way, then that'd be awesome. But I think watching the Oklahoma City Thunder's front office give all of those young guys an opportunity to grow, to develop, and not move on from any of those, trade pieces and draft pieces and all that other stuff. They kept their young core together. Well, one, they learned from the last time they messed up a young core, but to watch Oklahoma City literally give their young guys an opportunity to grow, develop, learn, and literally just thrive together is part of the reason why they're entering the season as defending champions. And look, like it or not, this is what they say in sports. It's a copycat league. And I think the approach that Trajan Langdon has used to give these guys an opportunity to see what they can develop into. Of course, you still got to make sure you put, complementary pieces around them to make sure that they still fit when you were building this team throughout the offseason, at the trade deadline, whatever the case might be. But if your core group stays together, and it's not just a core group that plays well, no, these guys actually love one another. These guys actually are very close in the locker room. We cannot tell you on countless occasions last year how these guys say they just love being around each other. When you have a core foundation like that, you have to keep it together at least for another season. Now, look, the wheels can fall off this season, knock on wood. Hopefully it doesn't. But if this core continues to build off of last season's success and they're looking just as good, if not better, then it's going to be a success for Trajan Langdon.
Right. And I agree with that. Like, OKC is definitely the template that every, team in the league is, trying to put out there and hope that their young players can develop. And the Pistons definitely have a lot of young players that fit that mold of just being young ball handlers and, can just, play a lot of different roles. And we haven't seen their full potential. I don't even think for Cade yet, which we're going to talk more so about in the next segment. But the thing I think that Trajan is doing right now is just keeping his options open. As of now, he hasn't signed Duren or Ivy to a long-term extension, which, it hasn't been, much of an issue right now just because the players want to be there. And I think that they're really focused on the team right now more so than the contract. And maybe, before I think the October 20th deadline, they will sign their extension. So that's something that I'm interested in seeing. But the longer they don't sign these guys and, let it go into the offseason of next year, the more so I think that it is on the table if, Ivy has a slow start to the season, if Duren doesn't take that leap that JB has seen in some of his previous bigs, such as guys like Evan Mobley, guys like Jared Allen in Cleveland, guys like that. And while I think they probably are going to make these leaps, and I think that they want to stick with the young core, I do think if a Giannis, gets unhappy, that no one should be off the table, in my opinion, except for Cade and maybe Asar. But I'm not the type of guy that just, wants teams to throw away picks and young players if they don't have to, especially when it's worked out how it has for the Pistons when they traded, for guys, like I said, Blake Griffin a few podcasts ago, and it only lasted like a year or two before they were in a similar situation. So you don't want to rush the process, but I've never seen the East be this wide open where teams that weren't competing for championships long ago are now competing just because of, trades they made in the past, such as, teams like the Knicks or even the Cavs, trading a lot of picks for Donovan Mitchell, just, so they can get over the hump and things like that. And while these teams still have to get to the championship, I think that the Pistons can be in the same boat, just with what they did in the playoffs last year. But just maybe one move away if, they aren't able to get over the hump, at the trade deadline.
At Media Day, here's what Kay Cunningham said about having the opportunity to play for a front office that literally kept the core group together for a second season.
Yeah, it means a lot. It means a lot to have belief in the organization and you. We've been a very young team for my whole career here. A lot of guys that we've all been trying to figure it out, day by day together and stuff, and to have that belief from the organization, it's very reassuring, but also, it puts some more fire on you to, prove them right, I guess is what I'm looking for. So, we're excited. Like I said, we're excited to have the same group back. We're excited to, be able to build off what we did last year and continue to prove people wrong.
I think, as I just alluded to, we know in sports it's a copycat league. What works for one franchise, other teams will try to follow that same path. I think when you have a young core like the Pistons, like Oklahoma City, that's going to be the new norm of the NBA, trying to figure out what you have in your young core. But if it becomes a situation where you can go out and get a guy to improve your team, I think if we do see the Pistons make a move and try to trade maybe one of their young core pieces and probably attach one veteran, I can kind of see them doing something similar to what the Houston Rockets did throughout this offseason. That was, look, it only took my guy Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks and one first-round pick to go get Kevin Durant, who, if you make a list of the top 15, top 20 players of all time, he's going to fall somewhere in that list. We're not about to argue which number he belongs in, but that's all it took to get a top 20 player in NBA history. And I think that's going to be the approach that a lot of teams that's in a similar situation, like the Detroit Pistons, where if it becomes an opportunity where they can go out and get someone major, it's going to be, look, we're just going to give you X player, X veteran to match salary and one pick, and that's going to be it. And that will put them in a win-win situation, just like the Houston Rockets, because, look, the Rockets still got their core group together, their core young group together, and all they did was added a top 20 player of all time, and hopefully the Pistons, if an opportunity presents itself, hopefully they could be like the Rockets where, look, we're just going to add this, that, and this draft pick for player X. Or they could be like the Oklahoma City Thunder, to where their core group developed so much to the point they're holding a Larry O'Brien trophy, which will be the fourth in franchise history. I'm still salty about the one that they got in 04, but that's neither here or there. But on the other side of the break, we're going to get into whether or not the Pistons at the end of this upcoming season, whether or not they're going to have somebody representing the Pistons for a season award. MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, Sixth Man of the Year, who knows? We're going to talk about that and more on the other side of the break.
For 44 years, Varsity Ford in Ann Arbor has been more than just a dealership. We're a family, proudly serving yours. As one of the top volume Ford dealers in the world, we're proof that when you treat people right, they come back, generation after generation. And now we make it easier than ever with complimentary pickup and delivery for both sales and service. So you can buy or service your Ford without leaving home. Varsity Ford, driven by family, built on tradition.
The 2025-26 season is basically here. Starting next Wednesday, the Pistons will open up their season on a 2-game road trip, starting against the Chicago Bulls, and then they will head to Houston and play the Rockets on October 24th. Then they would head back to LCA for their home opener against the Boston Celtics at 3:30. Tip off is at 3:30 on a Sunday. I'm not too happy about that because I don't like early games like that. However, it's going to be nice and fun just to get out of LCA a lot earlier, and probably catch Sunday night football and all that other good stuff. But look, the season is here, and I think the Pistons will have an opportunity if they build off of last season's success and they are better than they were last year. You're looking at a situation where you have guys like Cade Cunningham, Asar Thompson, possibly JD. JD might be up for, but you're looking at a situation where the Pistons could definitely have some representation for this upcoming season in terms of MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, Most Improved, Sixth Man of the Year, and all that other good stuff. And we can start with the big one. Cade Cunningham being in consideration for MVP. As of right now, he's actually leading the league in points scored per game at 23 for the preseason on an efficient 64% shooting, 50% from the line of arc, 5.5 assists, 2 steals. The man been balling through the first 2 preseason games. But do you feel like MVP is realistic for Cade as of right now?
I think it's very realistic. I think the biggest thing that it's going to depend on is one, his health, and two, just how successful the Pistons are. If they get that top 3 kind of seed, like in the top 3 mix, I think he's going to be in that conversation just because he is the best player on the Pistons. And if the Pistons have another leap as far in the win column, I could see Cade being represented, just being in the mix of just being considered, just because I think that he's getting national attention now. We just seen him on Jimmy Fallon like a couple weeks ago. So I think that Cade is starting to just be in that mix of just national stars, not just all-star stardom. He's starting to, be in commercials, things like that, being seen with rappers. So he's starting to get that fame associated with being one of the top young faces of the league. And then we've pretty much seen his entire career just going back from being one of the top players in high school, then, playing at Oklahoma State in college, and then going to the Pistons. So he's still very young, but I think just seeing that growth, that really does something for the fans. So if, like I said, the Pistons have another leap and he has another leap on the stat column, I can not only see him in MVP consideration, I also think that Cade can be just with what he did this last preseason game, which is, having 6 rebounds, 6 assists. He can really be on a triple-double watch nearly the entire season. So I don't want to say he's going to be the next guy to average a triple-double, because we know that's hard to do. Even prime James Harden has never done that just because he's been off like few rebounds, things like that. But I think he has the ball usage and also just having, just the control of knowing when to pass to teammates, and then just his size, getting the rebounds and just being able to advance the ball on the fast break or half court. I think he can, maybe get a few triple doubles, like, a month or something like that, where he'll be kind of in that mix. But you've seen prime James Harden, Cody. So do you think Cade can have that similar production? Do you think he could take that much of a leap this year?
I do, but like prime James Harden, I think this is going to be one of those seasons where we look back, and this is, if, like you mentioned, if he stays healthy, the Pistons take a leap. I think that it's going to be just like prime James Harden in terms of looking at everything that he do, but he falls short of that award. And I say that because being in Houston at the time with James, look, the MVP award, and we're going to talk about this with Defensive Player of the Year as well. Those are like the only 2 awards that's kind of like, it's kind of like narrative based. You have to come into the season. I mean, right now the season haven't even started, and they're already talking about the top 2 to be in consideration for MVP is going to be SGA, if he can win it for the second consecutive year, Jokic, of course, and and the top 3 in Luka. And to be honest with you, I kind of feel like if Luka get the Lakers to the 3rd seed and he plays over 65 games, with him being in LA, we saw how heartbroken he was when he left Dallas, and he's starting the season without LeBron, and it's a narrative for him to win his first MVP award is already starting to take shape. So I won't be surprised if we see him talking about, oh, you got robbed because Luka got it, woo woo. But I can definitely see him having, like I just mentioned, a season like James Harden in Houston, which was crazy, by the way. Especially what was that? The 17 through 2020, I want to say, my God. But I can definitely see him having a season like that to where he's going to be in a running, but he's going to fall short of the award, unless he does what I still consider that this young man earned that MVP. Unless he do something like Derrick Rose, you come out of nowhere, you're projected to be the 4th or 5th seed in the Eastern Conference, and you win 64 games and you got your team number 1 in the East. And the reason why I brought up Derrick Rose from 2011, I'm sure you know about this being a LeBron James fan. People always say he robbed LeBron. No, he didn't. There's only one way I can see K winning the MVP, and that's if the Pistons literally go out their way, win 60 plus games, and be number 1 in the Eastern Conference. And he dominate the whole entire season. That's the only way. And it's not just Derrick Rose who did that same approach. Allen Iverson had that same approach in 2001. And if we're being realistic, and I know it's kind of crazy to say now, given how the way the last decade has been in the NBA revolved around this one man, but Steph Curry had that same approach during his first MVP campaign in 2015. Going into the 2014-15 season, nobody expected the Golden State Warriors to be that good. I remember looking at a preseason ranking. They was projected to be 6th in the West at best. Wow. They ended up winning 63, 67 games. Steph won MVP and literally changed the whole trajectory of the last 10 years of the league. Hopefully Kane can do that too, but that's the only way I can see this season ending with Cunningham becoming this will be the first MVP winner in franchise history. Even though I do think, talking about being robbed, I do think I don't know if it's 88 or 89, I think Isaiah Thomas was robbed from an MVP regular season award, which I think one of those went to Jordan, which, I mean, look, I'm not trying to start no beef. I'm just saying our guy should have at least one regular season award. But one of those I do believe should have went to Zeke. But that's the only way I could see Cade Cunningham winning MVP. The same thing in terms of the next award that we're going to get into, and that's Defensive Player of the Year. Look, before I let you take it away, I remember talking to Asar last year, and this was during the time where people wanted to see his brother Amin be on part of the all defensive team. And I remember talking to Asar, and, I'm asking him about his brother, the defense and all his other good stuff. And, I asked him somewhere along the lines of, how would you feel, or do you think your brother should be part of the all defensive team? It was an easy lob question that I give him because, of course, that's his brother. Of course, he's going to say yes. But I remember him saying, I think that he should win Defensive Player of the Year. And he was like, unfortunately, that is an award that kind of goes to big men, so to say. And not only that, that is another award that's narrative based, because look, Victor Wembanyama, that's going to be his award for the next decade if he can stay healthy. And it's unfortunate because you have guys like Asar and Amin who are going to be in consideration for this award. And I know a lot of people are excited about Asar have an opportunity to play on ball, Coach JB Bickerstaff using his attributes more so on the offensive side of the ball. But I'm more excited about watching his growth and his leap on the defensive end, because I mean, if we keep it in the buck, especially now that he got a little bit stronger, you're looking at a situation due to his strength, his athleticism, his IQ. You're looking at a situation where he could guard positions 1 through 4, maybe 5, depending on if the other team goes small. And Asar Thompson, in my opinion, has already established himself as one of the best defensive players in the game, especially out there on the perimeter. And not only that, he took that challenge of guarding Jalen Brunson in the playoffs. He took that personal. And on media day, he even talked about how much he went back and revisit and watch clips from that game in order to improve his defense. Because look, regardless of how you feel about Jalen Brunson, you have to give credit where credit is due. He's one of the top 5 guards in the game today. That was Asar Thompson's matchup throughout the whole entire playoffs. So if he's able to take that, what he was already good at, and build on that, you're looking at a situation where he definitely should be in consideration for Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the thing that just separates Asar, I think, like you said, this is a big man's award in some ways, and it is narrative driven just based off wins and things like that. Like, the Cavs had the number 1 seed, Evan Mobley won it, and things like that. And I think the last non-big to win it, I think, was Marcus Smart, if I'm not mistaken.
It was. I think over the last decade, I think the 2 non-bigs to win were Smart and Kawhi, because I think Kawhi had a run in San Antonio, which, I mean, Kawhi is a forward, so I mean, you could count it, but at the end of the day, I mean, like, yeah, it was those 2. Everybody else, I mean, of course, Rudy dominated the award, and look,
right,
if Victor, which, I mean, Victor is phenomenal on defense, I must say, but if Victor can play 65 games, he's going to win the award. But Asar should definitely be in consideration.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that just is just interesting for me to watch about this is just that as we see Asar's offensive role increase, is that how is he going to look on the defensive end? Just because I think that one of the big reasons that they are, playing him so much on the ball is, of course, to take pressure off Cade, but also they're doing it right now, I think, for his conditioning. So I think the more just on ball, like just his on ball usage is going to be interesting to watch, just because is he going to just, I don't want to say slow down on the defensive end, but are they going to have to limit his minutes more on the defensive end? So maybe they put Ron Holland, maybe have him guard the best player in some spurts, and then maybe save Asar until the end and just kind of switch that up. So that's going to be something I'm watching as he just, like I said, increases his on ball usage and just on just offensive skills overall. So that's going to be probably the biggest thing, but he definitely has the ability. We've seen it, like you said, in the playoffs. Even though Jalen Brunson did get the best of him at times, he was always playing hard. And I think the other thing that separates him is just his mindset. I remember listening to a podcast earlier this summer. I think it was on the Young Man in the 3 podcast with his brother, where they talked about just being on a track when they were in high school and just doing lateral movements all around the track. So that was just something that just separates them, and just they're students of the game. They watch the NBA. You can tell they know ball. That's how we kind of put it. But I'm just going to be interested to see, even if he's just in that top consideration, maybe he's on the all defensive team. It would be pretty cool to see if him and his brother are both on a all defensive team this year. But I definitely think they will be on it together one day.
Really quick before moving on, some other awards I think the Pistons might have someone to represent their franchise with. I think Jalen Duren, if he has an opportunity to start the season off, pick up where he left off last year, I think he could be in consideration for most improved player, especially considering that you look at last year, outside of the slow start that he had, it was a pretty good year. He had 41 double-doubles. He had 15 games where he had like 5 or 6 assists, somewhere along those lines. Coach JB Bickerstaff wants to utilize him more so as a facilitator, as a playmaker for this upcoming season. That's just going to make his game a lot better. And now he's coming into a season, like I said in the last segment, he's coming into a season where he already knows his role. He already know what Coach JB Bickerstaff is expecting from him. So that's going to be really big for him. And also, Sixth Man of the Year, I think Karis LeVert can definitely have an opportunity to be in the running for that. Some of, if not his best year, came when he played for Coach JB Bickerstaff. And I believe he finished 4th, if I'm not mistaken, during the 2022-23 campaign. For that same award. So, this is a team, I think, look, we're definitely going to have an opportunity to, to either debate on this podcast, debate with fans, debate with other people fans throughout the season and be like, no, he should win. No, he should win. If things go right for the Pistons, they definitely can have a lot of guys up for several awards for this upcoming season.
Yeah, I agree, and that's a good point because Levert has came close. Even when he was on the Nets, he was, a pretty good
That's
player. I know
right. That's right.
he spot started some games and things like
Mm-hmm.
that, but he did come off the bench at parts of the season. So I think he definitely should be in the mix. Ivy is another person I could see in the most improved player consideration
He
just
would have won
because,
it last year, man. He
right?
definitely would have won that last year.
So those are some other names I'm looking to, but they definitely will be represented at least on the ballot. We don't know if they're going to win, but hopefully
Mm.
they get one of those players to at least win. Because I think Malik Beasley was in consideration last year for six man, right?
I believe he finished second, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah,
I know he was in the top three.
He was a big figure to the Pistons' success last year, as you know. But that's going to conclude this latest installment of the Detroit News Basketball Podcast, presented to you by Varsity Ford of Ann Arbor. As always, I'm your host, Coty M. Davis, Pistons beat writer at the Detroit News. Please remember to follow me on all your social media platforms. My Coty Davis _24. Once again, it's Coty COTY DAVIS _24. Why 24? Because Kobe Bryant is the GOAT, in my opinion. As I mentioned earlier in the show, I'm still salty about everything that took place during the 2004 finals. I wish that the Pistons lost in 04, won in 05. That way Kobe could have 6 instead of 5, but that's neither here or there. So Tarohn, I know as a LeBron fan, there's probably a couple of moments you wish that LeBron could get back and do over, but that's all I gotta say, my guy.
Well, all I can say about that is LeBron's playing at least one more year. I think he kind
He
of I
needs to
like the
retire. He needs to retire. Just stop it. And the reason why, look, I do like LeBron. LeBron, I mean, I've only watched the NBA for 2 years before LeBron James got there. I remember watching one of his high school things, and I've watched this whole man's career. I enjoyed it. And I always said I want him to be the first of my favorite players to just walk out on their own, because it hurts when you see all the guys that you grew up with just look so old and banged up and have so much things wrapped around their bodies because their body can't take it anymore. And I was hoping LeBron James would just walk, but now since he got like this nerve injury to the point where he's going to miss like the first month or two of the season, I'm like, well, here we go. You should have just retired last year, LeBron, because there's nothing more for you to do. That's just how I feel. Like, come on.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that the thing that's going to be interesting is how long he continues to just play at this pace. Like I said, I know he's been missing games the last few years and things like that, but I did like that he did, the little troll announcement kind of thing where he was hinting at retirement, but he's giving it one more go, one more chance at a championship. I hope it's the Pistons and Lakers, but we'll see. But once again, you guys, my name is Tarohn Finley, and follow me on all platforms at Tarohn Finley, TAROHNFINLEY. This was fun, Cody.
Well, I will say if it's Pistons Lakers again, I'm 100% going for the Pistons. One, it's the beat I cover. I want to cover a team that win a championship. And two, I can't have LeBron getting 5. You got 4, that's enough. Ooh, let's leave you right there at 4. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.